Hello, everyone. My name is Ketan, and I'm a technical marketing engineer with the Prisma SDWAN. So start with the OSPF. So today we support static routing and the BGP in the branch in a data center, and now we are also introducing OSPF. So almost every customer use IGP as a dynamic routing on their gateway router in a branch or the HQ, and it's mostly OSPF. And with the introduction to the OSPF, customers don't have to pay for additional gear or licenses to run their BGP at the core. And we are making it simple so that it's integrating with the existing OSPF infrastructure will without making any complex routing changes. So OSPF is supported in both branch and the data DC LAN. And on DC, there is no support for pairing with the edge model when using OSPF. It means IAN will have to either replace the edge device or it can sit between edge and the core. So if you look at the OSPF configuration, now you'll see a new tab next to the BGP. Well, you'll see a OSPF infrastructure settings. And if we double click on the settings, it gives more options to configure it. We can give the name, can create a OSPF configuration per VRF. There's a router ID configuration, and also there's the option to redistribute the BGP into the OSPF with the option to configure a route map. And under the BGP configuration, there will be option to redistribute this OSPF routes as well. So we can do redistribution for the BGP into OSPF and OSPF into the BGP as well. And currently we support three area types: a normal area type, a not so stubby area, and the stub area. So all this configuration will be under the OSPF configuration. So next we have is the branch gateway. So Prisma SD-WAN supports a creation of two main sites mainly today. That's a branch and a DC. But there are some cases where customers would want additional capabilities of branch and a DC in either of them. And so with that in mind, we introduced this new feature called Branch Gateway. So Branch Gateway is a new hybrid site type that provides the transit and the LQM new server capabilities uh, of a DC, along with the visibility and the path selection of a branch. So as you can say, a branch gateway is the best of both worlds. So just like a DC, it can create automatic VPN information to the branches in the same domain, and it can also act serves as a service and a DC group transit for a path policy. And just like a branch, we can configure. It provides a branch application visibility for all the traffic, and it can either be LQM server or LQM client. And we can also configure a path policy. So the path selection will be based upon the path and performance in QoS policies. And just like it can act as a normal SD-WAN path selection, or we can also configure it to prefer as a LAN just to act as like a DC for a traffic inbound from the WAN direction. So some of the use cases of the branch gateway, for example, like for a small deployment, small or medium networks, right? And so in those some cases, right, the site count is low and the deployment of a DC may not be acceptable due to the large cost relative to number of sites. And there might be perhaps a hybrid location which serves the need of a local users as well as some security and functions such as file shares or telephone system. So in such cases, we can use a branch gateway. Then in other cases, like a regional data center, like in some larger environment, uh, there are country-specific business units, and each country business unit will have their own data center facility that also requires egress path selection for local servers and potentially the users. So we can leverage a branch gateway in that case. Then a cloud deployments, like where customers desire a visibility into traffic for coming in and out of the cloud. So the branch gateway could be useful in those cases as well. So this is one of the if you double click on this, one of the use case as a regional data center, like you can say this is configured as a branch gateway, and we can have an automatic VPN creation between this branch gateway and all the branches here. And also the WAN-to-WAN forwarding will be taken care, like from a branch to branch gateway to the other branch can be facilitated. So branch gateway can act as a transit, and a branch to branch gateway to the standard VPN to, let's say, Prisma access can be facilitated. Also, the branch gateway can act as a LQM server for the branch connections. And also the LAN to WAN users and the servers on this hybrid branch uh, can be taken care with the path policies and all this configuration. The other use case is a DC interconnect. Let's say we have two different regions and two data centers. So customer can have a manual topology control between those two branch gateways. Can have a So with the branch gateway between two data centers, now will have a fabric tunnels, and a full SD-WAN path selection will be taken care with the policy configuration on those branch gateways. And there will be a DC to DC application visibility, which is not there today. So with the introduction of the branch gateway, we can have a DC to DC application visibility. Then a branch gateway WAN to WAN forwarding, and also a branch gateway LAN to WAN forwarding. And the branch gateway LAN prefixes will be advertised into Fabric, and also the branch prefixes will be advertised through the branch gateways. So so if you look at the configuration part, so when we create a branch site, there is an option to configure this branch as a branch gateway site. By default, it is disabled. So if it's disabled, then it will create as a normal branch. When we enable this, it will create as a branch gateway site. Once we enable it, it gives the option like, do we want to prefer the LAN default over a WAN? That means like it will act as a DC site. And once we confirm, the branch gateway will be created. And once the tunnels are created between the branch and the branch gateway, there is a new tab next to the which shows a branch gateway to the branch. And over here, all the tunnels between the branch gateway and the branch will show up. And under the flow browser, you'll see the egress path. If you select a branch gateway site, you'll see a egress path which shows the path policies, and egress path will show the branch gateway path configuring the path policy. That's all I have from my side. I'll hand it over to Graham.
Awesome, hey folks. Let me bring up my screen. All right, I know there's questions coming in as well, and we will answer those questions over the course of the session here, and then open up for Q&A at the end. So once again, my name is Graham Shepard. I'm a product manager within the Prisma SDWAN business unit here, and I'm going to cover a couple of the other 641 innovations that are coming out. Just a side note, 641 is obviously a part of our controller and element release. That is coming out over the next month, right? So the controller upgrades are rolling out as we speak, and then the element image will follow shortly after that. So a couple of the other enhancements here are additional features and capabilities driven around app SLA assurance. So if you were not aware, as part of 631, we introduced a new stack called performance policy. So as you folks might know, especially the ones using Prisma SD-WAN, right? We use our policy stacks to make determinations for how we forward traffic, how we provide quality of service, how we do security, and performance policy is all around how you can set your application SLAs. So the concept of, hey, I want to measure my application performance. Based on a set of SLAs that I configure, I want to enforce that. And last but not least, I want to alert if we cross these thresholds from a visibility and a reporting perspective. So this is a capability that was released as part of 631, and the goal here is to continue to develop and enhance these capabilities as part of the application assurance process. So, when we released in 631, we have always had the ability at a per flow basis to be able to monitor the real-time traffic, as well as leveraging our link quality metrics and make decisions based on that data. What's being added as part of the 641 release is the addition of service probing and system metrics into that measurement category. So we'll specifically talk about these two components, and then we'll get into additional information around enforcement here in a minute. So service health probes. So like I said, Prisma SD-WAN natively, looks at the applications, looks at the transaction times, transaction reachability, and leverages that information to make intelligent decisions. Plus, we leverage obviously link quality metrics, right, to look at that health and also move applications on paths. What we're adding now is the ability to do service health probes. So why service health probes? Well, one of the concepts is, obviously in order to measure today, right, we really rely on that real-time traffic, right? By leveraging service health probes, which are now synthetic in nature, we can have always-on visibility for whatever endpoints that you may want to configure. So some useful information on, hey, what probe results and why would we look at that, right? Maybe there's specific applications we want always-on connectivity, always-on real-time metrics for, things like Teams, Google, Zoom. Maybe the specific paths on the internet underlay or specific internal services that we want to monitor all the time and leverage that for not only incident alerts, but also, path selection process. So it's just another tool, in your belt in terms of monitoring as well as making path decisions, in addition to monitoring the real-time metrics of the application, as well as the link quality information that we have. You can also, as you'll see, when you create these probe configurations, right, you can get granular down to 3-second failover decision making process when you use this in the performance SLA. So how does this get configured? So what you'll see in 641 is a new section called probes, right? And probes will be part of two components, a probe profile and a probe config. So, when you go in there, there will be default probe profiles, default recommendations of additional things that we will check in terms of things like, public reachability, to things like Cloudflare, DNS, and other items. So we're making general recommendations for checking, reachability, especially when we're looking at the underlay paths. But then you can also create your own custom probe profile and probe configs. So a probe profile is a subset of probe configs. You can go to the probe config section, and this is where you can create additional probe configs to your heart's desire, right? Are you checking things out on the internet? Are you checking internal applications? And we'll take a look here in a second so you can see what type of probes you can configure. So the three that will be supported as part of 641 will be ICMP, HTTPS, and DNS. So really all depending on what you're trying to measure, what you're trying to look at, right? These three are options. So you can see there, as part of the probe profile and the probe config, you'll be able to select things such as the IP address or the DNS, right? You'll be able to select the frequency of the probe, right? And that's why I was saying you can get down to as granular as 1 second and 3-second failover. And last but not least, you will also be able to select your probe path types, right? Do you want this probe to be probing the underlay, the overlay, up to Prisma Access, right? You'll be able to select whatever paths you'd like this probe to be able to be leveraged across. Addition things you can see here, obviously if you select things like HTTPS, right, what are the expected response codes? Also the ability to say allow insecure connections, especially if you're monitoring websites or things like that, that the SL certificate might not be within the ION. So all of these are options for you to select as part of that service health probe config and then apply to a probe profile. So profile generation, right, you'll be able to create it here. And what you can do is you can select up to 8 profile configs, right? So probe configs. So, one single probe profile can have up to 8 probe configs. And then from there, you can take that configuration. And the first place we'll look at using that and attaching that is actually in the circuit category itself. So remember, if you're deploying Prisma SD-WAN, one of the things you do is you create your public internet connectivity as well as your private connectivity. And all of that uses what we call circuit categories because it allows you to differentiate the path selection, right? And what is done on that circuit itself in terms of connectivity. So by default, we'll leverage our probe profile, right, that we create, but you can always go modify this and leverage whatever probe profile you would like to use. That then will generate and start all the synthetic probes across the desired circuits, as well as the desired path that you select. So here you can see we can even get granular if you don't want to do it on the circuit config, circuit label category, right? You can even do it on an individual circuit label itself. Now, two places that this will be predominantly used. One is naturally in Prisma SD-WAN, there's a concept called L3 reachability, right? And what L3 reachability does is whenever you attach a public internet circuit to a interface, what it does is not only validates that the port is up, you know, it's got Ethernet connectivity, the fiber's up, it naturally is doing profiling probes to begin with. You don't necessarily see that in the UI today, but it's reaching out to Google, it's reaching out to other things to make sure that there's not a captive portal in front of it and that we have internet connectivity, right? So when you do this and you enable this new probe profile, right, it's going to sort of inherit all those probes that you create, and it's naturally going to start pinging out and reaching out to any of this information on the public internet, right? As well as if you've selected, you know, any of the overlay fabric paths as well. So it's going to naturally enhance the L3 reachability in terms of the interface connectivity out to the internet. Now, we'll talk about how to use it in performance SLA in a second, but when it comes to visibility, the moment you attach these to a circuit or site, when you go to site summary and look at the individual circuit details, you're going to have a new tab, right? So not only we're going to show you the typical LQM metrics, like the latency, loss, and jitter across those circuits to the data centers, we'll also have all the probe configs that you've created and the visibility on, you know, round trip latency, you know, packet loss jitter, depending if it's, you know, DNS, ICMP, right, or HTTP. All that information will be displayed as part of that site summary circuit detail section. So you'll be able to look at individual paths, right? Understand what endpoint was being reached out to, and obviously the additional details from the real-time metrics that are part of that probe config, right? So not only are we going to be running those, but you'll get visibility on a per circuit basis of how those are getting connective, right? If they're failing, right? And then from here, we'll talk about in a second on how you can use these metrics to then influence path decision. So just to recap, right, as part of 641, we're bringing the concept of service health probes. There's going to be that new config of probes, right? So you'll be able to create probes based on ICMP, HTTP, and DNS. You can leverage those as part of probe profile, which then you can attach to a circuit. Right? We will default have our own set of selections as part of that probe profile, but you can always go modify those based on what you want to check from a connectivity perspective. These will be used as part of the layer 3 reachability, meaning just checking connectivity out to the internet. And in a second here, we'll talk about how these can also be consumed on a per application SLA basis to determine how you want your traffic to be forwarded. So the second part of measuring, we're also going to be including system metrics as part of performance policy. So in 631, right, performance policy was all about, hey, let me look at the real-time application connectivity, let me look at the link health monitoring, and from there, leverage that to make either an enforcement decision or an incident. As part of 641, the other application here now is going to be system health, right? So you can leverage system health and you can look at creating incidents. So this is all about looking at system metrics such as CPU, memory, et cetera, right? And based on those thresholds, creating incidents that you can track from a visibility perspective. So as you can see here, right, you can go in, you can select system metrics. As part of the match criteria, you can look at things like specific paths, and we can start looking at, you know, flows in terms of number of concurrent flows going through the system health metrics, as well as circuit utilization, right? Any of those metrics that you set will be monitored at that branch site. And based on your settings, right, it'll create an incident that will then be generated as part of our system incidents, right? It can be incorporated via email or via ServiceNow ticketing that you can leverage from a monitoring perspective. Here's an example of the incident, right? If you want to monitor, make sure your circuit utilization never exceeds, let's say, 80%, right? Maybe that's a threshold you'd like to just know from a capacity perspective. Absolutely, that's something you can do. And as part of that, we'll also be creating detailed remediation playbooks to help from a link monitoring as well as system health perspective. So the other thing that we'll be adding in, right, is the ability now to leverage these synthetic health probes, right, these service probe configs, as part of your application SLAs. So with performance policy, right, you can write an application pool rule to say, hey, let's say for Zoom, I want to monitor link health, I want to monitor the application connectivity. In addition to that, I might want to use a synthetic probe, right, as part of that monitoring. So you can see down there below, it'll be a new option to be able to select as part of the performance SLAs for your applications. And from there, you'll be able to select a specific service probe configuration, right? It could be ICMP. Obviously, if it's ICMP, you're going to see information here around jitter, latency, and packet loss. If it's HTTPS, right, you're going to see the error codes. If it's things like DNS, right, response time. So based on the probe you configure here, right, or select, you'll get additional information where you can select that application SLA experience. And then this can drive not only the creation of an incident, but the selection to move applications to different paths, right? Or select different paths based on the performance, not only of the real-time applications, but also the probe configuration as well. So as part of this, right, just to take a step back, right? From a measurement perspective, we've got these new synthetic probes. We also have the ability to now leverage health metrics of the device, right, to create incidents in terms of visibility. The second piece that we're adding as part of 641 is new enforcement operations, right? So we had the ability as part of 631 to do app prioritization, right? We had the ability to do things like adaptive FEC. A net new one here is packet duplication. And so for those who aren't aware, right, what we're talking about here with packet duplication is if I have multiple circuits at my branch for critical applications, right, our ability to duplicate that same packet on multiple paths to that same destination. So in that case, if there is one path that begins to get faulty, right, we can basically leverage that other path for sending and receiving that same application traffic, right? So depending on the use case, depending on the application, it could be a great way to resolve any circuit problems that may be occurring and guaranteeing that your application experience is going to stay consistent. Now, this is enabled really easily. It's part of the exact same performance policy SLA creation. The only difference now is there's going to be a net new action, right? So packet duplication will be an action that you can select there. From a configuration perspective, the only thing you need to make sure that you do is when you select your path filters, you need to make sure that you select, multiple paths, right? So we obviously need to have two paths because these are the two paths that we're going to select in forwarding that application, right? And so the moment you basically configure packet duplication, right, at a branch, if it's got those two circuits, it's automatically going to create replication of that traffic to the far end DC. So a couple other items. Talk a little bit about integration with Prisma Access. So for folks who don't know, Prisma SD-WAN has always had a very tight integration with Prisma Access from an orchestration and tunnel creation perspective. Cloudblades was something that was developed 4 or 5 years ago, right, to really orchestrate the configuration of the tunnels. Since acquisition, Prisma SD-WAN has become sort of natively integrated with Prisma SD-WAN using this concept called easy onboarding. So for those that don't know, easy onboarding onboarding is supported for Cloud Manager and Prisma Access, Prisma SD-WAN. And basically, if you are part of the same tenant service group, right, you have Prisma SD-WAN and Prisma Access enabled in the same tenant, right, this new native integration will be there for these greenfield experiences. And so what it allows you to do is, rather than leveraging Cloud Blade and tagging interfaces, you'll easily be able to just, in the UI, select a branch and say, I want to connect it to Prisma Access, and then it'll create those tunnels to the closest Prisma Access location. So, I'm not going over the full configuration here. I just wanted to provide insights for those who didn't know that this was a capability that was released earlier this calendar year. Right, and we're looking at obviously migrating Cloud Blade customers over to this at some point as well. Right, so this will really be the future integration for seamless connectivity and experience as part of the UI to connect Prisma SD-WAN to Prisma Access. Now, some of the enhancements that we're coming out with as part of 641 is the ability to also do security bindings. So Prisma SD-WAN has a zone-based firewall that's used for segmentation, right? And customers who leverage this, anytime we create connectivity to Prisma Access, generally would have to go set that zone. In this case, that'll be automated as well. So not only the connectivity of the tunnel, the routing connectivity via BGP to Prisma Access, but additionally now what zone you want those interfaces to be placed on. So that way it can automatically integrate into your security policy once that connectivity is complete. Another thing we're adding is just a really easy way to disconnect. So, we've seen customers ask that, hey, they're sort of chopping and changing sometimes, or they onboard to one region, they want to change it to another, right? So once you've connected that branch, you'll see this experience in the branch site configuration. You'll also have this ability to basically disconnect from Prisma Access. So it's a quick option that'll tear down the configurations, remove all the connectivity Prisma Access, and at a later point, if you want to re-enable it, you just click connect again, and it'll rebuild all that tunnel back up to Prisma Access from a connectivity and forwarding perspective. So just two net new updates in terms of this HASI easy onboarding, and obviously a lot more to come here in the future. The next piece is operational simplicity. So this is another sort of net new feature that came out earlier this calendar year called site templates. So what site templates is all about the ability for you to deploy at scale. So we've had a tight level of integration for bulk deployments with our config tool, and what we did is we took that config tool and integrated naturally into the UI and the controller. So this is something we actually did a review of last week as part of the CS webinar. So I definitely would highly recommend folks going to listen to that. But the whole idea of this is customers who want to roll out at scale. They want the ability to easily pre-provision, and they want to be able to create a repetitive motion, right, to be able to roll out branches in the hundreds during the week with minimal effort. So this is what site templates is all about. But what we're releasing as part of 641 is the ability to do conditional statements. So in certain deployments, customers like flexibility of saying, hey, yes, my standard deployment is always going to be, let's say, an ION 3200, but in one site it's a static IP, and the other site maybe it's a DHCP. I'd rather not create two templates for that. Conditional statements basically allow us to provide a little more flexibility when things start being modified slightly from branch to branch, right? So we can leverage these in templates, right? Professional services absolutely able to help, as well as these are just additional conditional statements that you can leverage in order to make it easier for you to manage these variations and still leverage a single template, or even the ability to reduce the number of variables that you might need to provide to get the same outcome of that template. So this will be there in 641. You can basically export the template, add in whatever conditional statements you want, and re-upload that into the UI, and then start leveraging that for deployments. Some of the new items, App ID. So as part of 6.0, we introduced, sort of a unified App ID, and as part of 641 here, we're going to expand that to over 400 native applications, right? So just becoming parity really with Prisma Access and GFW, right? Same set of native applications here. So you'll see that as part of the UX upgrade, and additional visibility in terms of device support. So as you move to the 6.4.1 element, right, there'll be, significant more native applications as part of the system. Nothing changes here from our ability to quickly and easily create custom applications. It's just net new out of the box, native applications that will be part of the controller. A couple more pieces, and then we can open it up for QA. Standard VPN enhancements. So we're bringing additional capabilities into our standard VPN creation. Periodically, there's use cases where customers want to create standard VPNs between the ions, maybe for DC headends. So basically, we're giving additional capabilities in terms of setting the mode operations. This happens often when we've got NAT involved, or other items where we need to connect two DCs together and specify who's the active, who's the passive from an initiation connection to make sure that we can bring up that IKE as well as the IPsec configuration. So it's nothing significant in terms of a change. It's really more bringing UX capabilities that were only there in the CLI before that you'll see as part of those advanced options. You'll also then see those overlay connections, any standard VPNs, any endpoints there, right? You'll see that as part of the overlay connections between data centers for whatever connectivity you choose to use. Next item is we are releasing integration with Megaport. So Megaport will be able to support our virtual ions. So for customers leveraging Megaport that want to use their backbone for connectivity, we see this more often lately now that customers want to, ride the internet, get onto Megaport and connect to other locations, whether it be cloud providers or whether it be colos or other locations across the world. So our virtual ion will now be as part of Megaport's offering, and you'll be able to spin that up and obviously part that as part of your Prisma SDWAN controller and create connectivity from your branch ions to that Megaport MVE. And last but not least, just a couple items that we just wanted to call out in terms of additional features. Additional subscription visibility is coming into the portal. So for folks who are leveraging aggregate bandwidth, right, they had a clarity report that was there that they could download. This is naturally automatically now being moved into the subscription usage page. So here you'll be able to see your base subscription in terms of the amount of bandwidth that's being used for the tenant, as well as the top sites. And obviously you'll be able to download all the individual metrics out as well in terms of CSVs for that content information. So no net new real content, right? What this is now is just an easier way to find this within the UI, to display it, as well as export this information. And a couple new items here, just things that we want to highlight. VRF, something that was released earlier this year was 6.3.1. Additional support now for standard VPN, DNS, and DNS services. So for customers who want to use VRF and connect to third-party services or connect up to different Prisma Access tenants, right? They can do that now by using VRF for segmentation purposes. Before, VRF was only supported on the native fabric connectivity. Now we support it on standard VPN also. The multi-tenant switcher enhancements. So this is part of Cloud Manager. This is nothing specific to SD-WAN, but just an easier way for customers that have multi-tenant to be able to switch through those instances as part of that left-hand navigation in Strata Cloud Manager. Voice VLAN. On the 1200S platform and the 3200, if running an L2, we do have L2 switch ports as well as PoE capabilities. So at small branch locations, if you're looking at the Ion being the complete single box replacement where it's acting as not only the WAN edge, but also the switch connectivity. We now also will be able to support Cisco phones and other items. When you select a voice VLAN via LLDP, we will transmit that VLAN ID down to that phone, right? So that phone can leverage that for obviously registration processes, as well as then the data VLAN can be provisioned on a separate layer 2 segment, right, for connectivity. So naturally, there's nothing new in the UX here. It's just if you select voice VLAN, naturally via LLDP, we're going to advertise that down to the third-party phone for connectivity. And in similar fashion, as part of the 1200S, the L2 ports and the 3200, they use SVIs, right? They have these L2 ports, and obviously we create SVIs for the L3 connectivity. We're also now going to provide the ability to determine the operational state of that, meaning, hey, if I've got an SVI, when should it be up and when should it be down, right? Do I want it to stay up even if all my L2 ports go down? Or do I want it to go down because my L2 ports have gone down? So, this is something for folks who have been doing switching for quite some time, and probably understand and heard the term before, operational state. So basically within the UI, you'll be able to control how you want that to perform. This becomes helpful and handy when maybe you want to continue to inject these routes into the fabric, even if L2 ports are no longer available, or for cases where you want to do HA, and you have no switches at all, right? How do you want to handle that in terms of an HA tracking? So additional documentation we provide as well, but it's just a net new feature, and you'll see it in the UI when you configure an SVI as part of 641.